Steve, there are three reasons why I'm deeply humbled and overjoyed to connect with you today on Sunday Sips. The first of which, you are a remarkable global medtech entrepreneur. And while combined we have 40 plus years of medtech experience, 75% of that is attributed to you, if not more. From humble beginnings as an Ethicon sales rep in the 90s to becoming the chief commercial officer of Europe's biggest surgical robotics unicorn, CMR, you're an absolute legend. You've raised you've raised over 1.5 billion in startup capital, all the while remaining intimately tethered to the unmet needs of clinicians you serve. And this leads to the second reason that I'm so humbled and overjoyed to curate this discussion. In the past year, you have become a leading voice on LinkedIn for folks hoping to start up in medtech. And you've built a community of 17,000 global innovators by sharing your scars and breaking down the barriers that prevent them from venturing out and progressing global healing. As I was in the middle of a messy exit from a decade-long career at Johnson & Johnson to stay in Japan, your content was a consistent encouragement to me to keep moving forward on my own entrepreneurial journey amidst so many failures and headwinds. So my hope is by the end of this episode, our fellow MedTech collaborators will glean a more grounded understanding of how to start up in MedTech. But beyond that, I hope they leave the discussion with a renewed zeal and intensity to step out and serve patients, regardless of how difficult that path may be. And the third and final reason that I'm so humbled and filled with joy is that I have no idea where this conversation will take us. I've prepared plenty of questions and planned an exploration of this imaginary case study where we co-found an endoluminal robotic surgical system in 2025. But overall, I'm genuinely just intrigued and curious about where the wind will blow us next in the hour to come. I'm also parenting three kids in the background, so that'll be fun.
Normal.
So, Steve Bell, you have a remarkable big brain. So it's a privilege to officially welcome you to Sunday Sips, where I curate the latest big brain insights to provide deep reflections worth sipping on. That's all I got. So,
Well,
it's a
no,
work.
well, thank you. That's a very humbling and actually probably one of the best intros that I've ever had the pleasure to be given towards me. So thank you very much. And thank you for doing, you've done, I know, and we talked and you've done a lot of research on this. And one of the things that I'll give you a lot of kudos for is that you're very professional in the way that you do this. And I actually really appreciate that because one of the things we'll probably get into a little bit today is about professionalism, and it may all seem a little bit random, but the professionalism is just as important as anything in our business. So thank you very much. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here to talk about this today.
Hey, it's the pretentious engineer and editor from the future, and we got into a ton during this discussion. So I wanted to provide you a quick roadmap of where this podcast actually went and how it unfolded so that you could decide if you want to stick around and glean from it. I've listened to it at least 8 times during the editing process, and it is still like, wow, the insights that Steve dropped during this journey. So, first of all, you have three key reasons to stay for the journey. The first of which, we have a combined 40 plus years of medtech experience across different surgical robotic contexts. And we get into the weeds, and it's a lot of fun. Second, by the end of this conversation, you should have a more grounded understanding of the nuance of medtech innovation and how large companies like Strategics and smaller players work together to actually advance care on behalf of the patients we serve. And the third, we do get to this beautiful case study where we create an endoluminal surgical robot together. And Steve shares his big 5 tips on how we could actually see that become a success. So we found a robot in 2025. We go into a little bit of story time leading up to that, where Steve shares some of his experiences moving from Ethicon sales into marketing and eventually becoming the chief commercial officer of CMR, which is a massive robotics company that's up for sale right now, potentially, which we get into that as well. And then I share a little bit of my story moving from Ethicon engineering into directing front-end global medtech R&D in a Japanese context, my move into entrepreneurship. We look at why 85% of startups fail in the medtech space. And then we jump into the case study. And there's 5 key knowledge drops. They're so good. The 5th one, if you are a tech founder, will surprise you. So I hope you enjoy the discussion. Feel free to do all the liking, subbing things. And I'll also have some links below that can help you interconnect with Steve and me. back to the podcast. You could sip on that.
One of the things we'll probably get into a little bit today is about professionalism, and it may
Mhm.
all seem a little bit random, but the professionalism is just as important as anything in our business. So thank you very much. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here to talk about this today.
Yeah, no, it's you carry the same level of professionalism, but you're accessible. And that's why I love your content. You just go on walks and talk. Like there was there's one video you made just to kind of like hop in where you were discussing the importance of moving between companies and how that impacts your pay and how you're compensated and your overall growth. And I stayed in J&J from straight out of college for a decade and just navigated a world of pain financially as I was trying to provide for my 4 kids. And I kept getting these great opportunities to lead at higher levels, but the comp never worked. And that video was like, oh my God, this is so real. And you weren't dressed up, just talking and walking, providing insight. So I think there's this beautiful line between authenticity, but still having the right candor in these corporate spaces, and you walk it very well. So it's so fun and humbling.
No, thank you. I think those. So a little bit about those walks, just to be, they're sort of like self-confessionals for me as well.
Uh-huh.
They are reflective moments, and it's like therapy for myself. And I think everyone listening to this, and everyone who's known me for a long time knows that I need a lot of therapy. And but it is important. And I think on this long journey that I've been on, the people that I've respected the most are the people who've been genuine. And
Mhm.
I hope that's rubbed off with me a little bit from them, also just from my upbringing. Upbringing from a fairly humble place near Liverpool with an Irish heritage mum who was pretty just be straight, be normal, be yourself, or you
Yeah.
get a whack around the head off her. So yeah, and I think again, another thing, the thing that's important in this journey is that we have connection. I think
Mhm.
connection is real, and I don't believe you can connect with people who are fake. You can connect on a superficial level, but it runs pretty thin, pretty fast.
Mhm. And how have you built that connection across like the whole arc of your career?
Yeah, so I think from a career point, so on a personal level, I'm just a bit of a
Mhm.
cheeky chappy from the north of England, so it becomes quite easy for us to do that kind of stuff. But from a career level, I was just hyper fortunate that in my early days, when I was sort of like, I was told J&J I was 25, but I was actually just turned 20 when I got into J&J. It was a long story, but the guy who took me in was a fabulous guy who was a guy called David Follows, and again, just a very connected person. You're personable. The
Mhm.
way that he treated me like a human being, the way he was willing to take risks on me and things. And I think from my day one of my corporate venture, as it were, I had a human being on the other side of me who was my sort of mentor and boss. And that really rubbed off on me. And throughout my career at J&J, I was just very fortunate to be with, not always. There were some leaders who were just, they were just career animals or whatever. But I had
Mhm.
some really genuinely awesome leaders. People like Laura Angelini. She had a really big impact on me, and she was a brilliant leader. Working with her as an example. So I've just been very fortunate that I got the right mentoring and coaching and environment to realize that this kind of connection method and the genuine connections was just it was the right way to do it.
Mhm. Yeah, I've found that innovation is so like rooted in that connection that there's all these goals we can go after as a business and areas that matter, but it's really the people that build the product. And as I've continued to expand and grow in my career, like you start to bring this little cohort of people with you. And then I was always surprised just how much people kept coming back
Yeah.
2 years later, 4 years later. Like if you did the work right and built the connection the right way on the front end, there's something small and humble and simple. Then downstream, when that person's a director or a VP, it's a different conversation when you run into a different blocker that you have to move forward. And having built that reputation, that trust is so important and so valuable. And I think a lot of people miss that. They just get focused on execution and they leave a trail
Yes.
of glass. And we
Yeah.
all know who those
Oh,
people are, and we don't want
we
to work
do.
with them.
We do, and it is so contrasting when when you're with good people. You form bonds for life. I have some really good what I would call more than colleagues, I would call friends who I've met either through J&J, who are lifelong friends. I actually talked with one just today, Mike McEwen, who spent a lot of time with Ethic and Endo, and then he went on to ResMed, and literally we had a good chat this afternoon. And I'm talking, that's 30 years of connection to that person. Then you've got, I had people in the startup, which named Brad Sharp out in Citra, with talking with Brad the other night, and we talk about work and we talk about family, and I've seen his family grow and I've seen everyone grow. And that kind of co-involved trust that you then build from a personal point of view, it's important. From a humanistic point of view, it's important. But from a business point of view, I think it is important. I think, if Brad says to me, we're going to go and form a company together tomorrow, that immediate bond and that immediate trust, that is one of the power factors of what I think will say, okay, that company has a chance of surviving. So I think it's important. And I think I would encourage everybody, especially who are in the start of their career, build your career on reputation, trust, and connection, because it'll take you way further than politics.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. This is so fun. So, Steve, before we really jump in, because I have questions, all kinds of fun stuff. I actually want to do a quick note to the viewers of this, because we have two different contexts we serve. Your folks are deep in medtech, which is fantastic and beautiful. I have a very eclectic community of 40,000 folks across TikTok and YouTube. I do a lot with the coaching and global leadership. So a lot of people are outside of this world. So just a quick note to the viewers, I'm going to do everything I can to make the language of this discussion as inclusive as possible for you folks who aren't deep. But I want you to be able to speak freely with the right proper medical words and things like that. So at the end of this call, I'll go and do a list of definitions and links and descriptions. So if we're talking about a robotics company, we don't have to lose time defining everything. But I'll make that accessible to people as well. That way they feel like they can still be part of the dialogue, because I know we'll get into surgery, and surgery pushes some people away that don't get it.
It does. I think you're right. But even within our own industry, we can become sort of acronym junkies.
Yes.
Very often. And again, I think that's another piece. I don't care which industry you're in, but everyone's got acronyms, right? And I'll probably throw some out today, and I'll probably lose myself on some of it. That's okay. But the key is, again, for anyone at any leadership level, somebody sitting in a meeting, not everyone's a communicator, not everyone's as extrovert as say you or myself, and we wouldn't say, didn't quite get that acronym, what were you talking about there? So I think being mindful a little bit of that, which is demystifying and debunking, that is an essence of communication that I think is where you see excellent communicators. It's when they do demystify the jargon and they demystify it, so that I call it my mum conversation. I will keep coming back to my mum a lot. She has a big impression on me. But my mum conversation, if my mum could sit and watch our conversation and kind of get it, not everything, but get most of it, I think we've communicated well. I will try and remind myself throughout the conversation as well, for your listeners, but also just, in case my mum watches it.
No, it's helpful. I love when I was first learning about stapling technology, for folks who don't know what a surgical stapler is, it fires a whole bunch of rows of these really tiny staples, and it compresses the tissue and then transects it, so it allows us to cut with minimum bleeding. There is a new innovation within Ethicon where we're doing 3D staple lines. So rather than forming these perfect Bs, the feet would cross over. And I always loved how engineers would pick up these little air tube accessories for manufacturing and connect them and bend them together to just contextualize to every new co-op and engineer. They're like, this is why this is different, and this is how it's special. This is the clinical outcomes you get. And I found that throughout my career, you're always learning how to tell a different story at the right level. So how have you navigated storytelling in your journey and bringing people into this kind of nuanced conversation, whether you're pitching to venture capitalists, whether you're internally talking with executive leadership about challenges within your work group, whether you're trying to inspire someone on the ground or captivate a clinician? You pitch very well and you cast vision very well. So what led to that gifting, and how have you grown that skill?
I'd love to do the fable, which is that when I was younger, I was taken to Ireland and I kissed the Blarney Stone, which I did. So maybe there is some kind of weird mystic part to it. I don't know. When I was very young, I think the reality is I was just very fortunate that I realized very early on in my career that when you talk in story arcs, and you take people with you on the story, even if they don't get all the details, they get the emotion behind it. And as
Mhm.
much as anything in a communication is the emotional piece that you put across, the enthusiasm or the dread or the fear or the urgency or the gravity or the levity of the situation, all of those things you can transmit in the way that you tell the story as much as what you say in the story. So
Mhm.
I learned very early on that you need to talk in these story arcs with emotion and take people on a journey and paint visuals in people's heads. People respond better in visual things. Not everyone. Some people prefer an Excel sheet, very complex Excel sheet. I've met a lot of them in finance and engineering.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the best communicators I've been with and worked with, they speak in these kind of personal stories that touch people. And when you do that, you're talking about the staplers, okay?
Mhm.
And you're talking there about the engineers. They take these demo products so they can show them, because people are tactile and visual and they can see
Mhm.
it. If I just sit there and talk about the 3D curving and we want a certain interspacing because you want to have a certain amount of blood flow and therefore you don't want necrotic edges and this 3D
Mhm.
lattice, but it just doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
But when you start either demonstrating or showing or touching or connecting and take people on a story arc, let me tell you why we wanted to change this. What was the why behind it? I'm a Simon Sinek fan, and to
Mhm.
start with the why, I like to start my story arcs with why. We saw that patients didn't get good blood flow. We thought that wasn't good enough. We thought it could be done better.
Mhm.
That given the why, okay, and then you take them on the story arc, and then you conclude off, and you try and reach. You should always try and in your communication reach a conclusion. Whether you're pitching as a startup, if you pitch at a startup and you go through all your stuff and you do a show up and throw up, as I call it,
Mhm.
and you end up just talking and you leave that last slide. And the last slide is just like a set of technical details. And you go, and that's the technical details.
Yeah.
That's not human. That's not how we
Mhm.
work as humans. You don't go to somebody's house, have a nice dinner, finish the dessert, stand up, put your coat on and just walk out. You don't do that. That's not how
Mhm.
humans work. What you do is you stand up and say, thank you. It was a lovely dinner. It was very nice. Thank you very much. Love to see you again. You do a closing and a goodbye and a formal thing. And then you don't normally just walk out. You don't say, oh, I'll give you a ring sometime or give me a call sometime. Or
Mhm.
there's kind of an ask at the end of it as well, usually in a human interaction in a story arc. So I think when we talk in story arcs in communication, we have to really start with the why. Helps if it's got a personal connection to that person or to you, so that people realize this is about people. Take them over the arc, but end the story in the right way. You know,
Mhm.
you can't just finish it hanging in a concept or there's either an ask or there's a conclusion that you want people to get to. And the experts in this, there's a lady who I work with called Millie Malencrot, and she was a trainer for teaching people TED Talks. And now I've told you the secret of this. Watch every TED Talk. It goes in that story arc.
Mhm. I've done two
That's
of them.
yeah, okay. So
Yeah.
you've
I
probably
know
been
the art.
trained, right?
Yep.
So you are. But I think it works, right? It's powerful. That's why TED
Mhm.
Talks are powerful, because they communicate and they connect and they end. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's satisfactory as the
Mhm.
listener to be involved in the conversation. So yeah, I encourage people to think in their story arcs, from small conversations to big presentations to pitches and to asks. The more you can talk in a story arc and bring the people with you on that journey and that adventure, that I just think the better the communication happens.
Mhm. And I think, like, I like the concept of vectors. Like, you have your origin, you have direction, your magnitude, and I like to share, like, where's the company at? Where's it going? What's the why there? Where am I at? How do I overlap with that vector? Where's this person I'm captivating into? Where are they at? And what's their vector? And how do you get everything to kind of cross over and weave? It's the same with sales as well, as you're trying to convert
Yeah,
somebody
yeah,
in a different capacity, right? You have to figure out where they're at. It's a little bit of change management to pull them into that vision of what the
yeah.
future could look like.
So it's interesting when you talk about vectors. What you're talking about a little bit on vectors is maybe some people get it, maybe some people don't. But there's a word that comes under there. If you have two vectors that diverge, okay, So you're talking about alignment. You're trying to get vectors to converge. You're going to get a convergence and an alignment. And it's important that vectors don't just go off in whatever direction, but you also try and get you going in the same direction. And conversations that work the best are when you understand you're diverging a little bit. You adjust the conversation. You bring the conversation back around, and you try and get the alignment back again. And I don't want anyone, especially if you've got younger people starting in their career watching this, I don't want them to think it's all, rainbows and unicorns and it's all happy in meetings and stuff. I mean, sometimes there's almost like close to punch-ups in meetings. I've seen it, right? But the secret to that, the best communicators in the meetings are the ones who can ride through that kind of turbulence, but they get everyone back on track. And at the end of the story arc, whether people have agreed or not, you've got alignment at the end of it, and you all walk out of the room at least with a shared alignment. If not, it's not always 100% agreement. I've not agreed, but the majority has agreed. We've decided this is the right way. We've all kind of aligned on it. All right, I'm aligned. And the best communicators are the ones who walk out of either conversations, meetings, plans, planning, whatever, with an alignment, so that the next phase that goes on, at least your vectors are in a similar direction.
Yeah, because we've talked about this. Like, I worked as the 16th engineer in the whole verb ethicon experiment. So I was very early. I ended up moving into robotics controls, and you have these ethiconian perspectives of us making the instruments. You have verb surgical making the robot, a build to buy nightmare in some capacity, even though we want to root for J&J. And I just remember how much ego is present within different technologists arguing for what they believe is right. The robotics controls folks on the verb side want us to make an instrument that has zero backlash, zero compliance, because it's easier to control. And then we're looking at what's necessary to make these instruments actually function with some clearances so that we could assemble it, have design for manufacturability. But you still have these two competing factions with different mismanaged objectives. One company's trying to progress the tech enough to get acquired and have it work. The other one has to launch a full-scale robot that is compliant from an FDA perspective. So how do you work across different levels of competing factions and mismatched, we'll say, incentives that drive different performance? Because I would be grilled in one of these, 30 people meetings on a call and just have to take my deep breaths and then come back and regroup with my management and then come back and explain where we're moving next. Like, how do you pull yourself out of the technology and the heat of those discussions and figure out what's motivating and incentivizing each person, and how to then escalate up the right level to then drive a decision to move everyone forward?
Yeah. So I think that's a really great question. And I don't think there's one simple answer to it, but I think there's multiple answers. One of the more fundamental ways that you can get to the right answer is to start with data. Okay. We can all have our own opinions, but you can't have your own facts. And sometimes the facts lie in the data. And that probably from a guy who seems more creative than engineering, but it's not. In marketing, it's facts and data as well. In commercial, it's facts and data. The data can often be the source of truth and the ground truth. So sometimes what you have to do is you have to take the emotion out of everything, because it's somebody's pet baby, it's somebody's real pet idea. They've furnished it for a long time, and they're emotionally entangled with it. And sometimes you have to say, okay, look, we can both be wrong. We can definitely both be wrong here. Let's go back to a ground truth between us, where let's see what the data tells us, and let's start back from there and just make sure that we're aligned on the ground truth first. How we decide to go forward from there can be different. But you talk about I'll try to make it easier for your listeners, but you talk about the robotic control and the instruments, and you want perfection in the control because you want to go from A to B with it being a perfect movement with no overshoot, no nothing. You don't want the robot to go further.
Yeah,
no latency. No latency. But sometimes in the way, because you've got a human in the loop, you've got a surgeon in the loop who's actually expecting some latency and expecting some overshoot, because that's how they do it in the real world. You may end up also having, as you say, manufacturing constraints, which is, if you want this to the absolute perfection, that instrument would be so expensive to make, and the amount of size it would be. It would just be an impracticality. So you end up where the ground truth can say, the reality of the data set is these are the inputs that we need. This is what it needs to actually do. This is the performance matrix that it actually needs to be at. And then you can step back and you can reframe everything around that ground truth, which says, so does it absolutely have to be a perfect A to B? I mean, could you make it? I mean, because the ground truth says it's okay, that sort of thing. And I think sometimes you can do it through that. There are points though where you may get into a conversation where you're going just in loops. It's the dog chasing its tail, and you can't get out of it, and nobody's going to let go, right? That's where often in meetings you have to either have governance or structure in meetings or in conversations where we all get a voice, but at some point a decision has to be made, and it can't just be some kind of weird completely socialistic way there where everybody's voice just counts 100%, because you end up with chaos. So you also have to have governance in there of saying, okay, well, ultimately, if we can't reach a decision, there has to be almost a referee that comes based upon the best evidence and the best data, not the best arguments, because the best arguments are often not the best solution, but the best data and the best practicality of the way forwards. Somebody has to make a call. And that's where, and again, if I'm talking to people who are starting in the career, that's where leadership comes in. At some point, you may have to be the leader. And as long as you've got the governance, the authority, and the responsibility to do that, you can't just stand up and say, I don't really care what everybody else wants, and this is it, because that's dictatorship. That's not leadership. Very different things. But at some point, you've got to get to a decision. And if you're at an impasse, you quite often have to make a tie break and say, okay, guys, heard it all, love it all. Based on the data, based on really good arguments from both sides, I think the best way forward is this. And you're probably going to be wrong, but that's okay. Leadership in startups is also about, you have to just make the best educated choice and go for it, because you can't spin your wheels for the next 3 years, because that's how your company dies.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. That we navigated so many unknowns, at least in my time within J&J, across Ethicon, Verb, Oris, moving into systems engineering, trying to constrain these things. Like you mentioned, ground truth. The reality is we didn't know our ground truth in many ways. We were still trying to headhunt and acquire people that had done this before. Systems engineering capability, we're like building it as we're building a system, trying to bring in folks from automotive and other spaces. And I think a lot of times we were arguing off of semantics because we didn't know even what data was necessary. You talked about completing the loop that was brought up so many times. Well, how much loop could be completed by a clinician? How do you baseline that? Are we baselining it off of just testing on our competitor? Because we don't have a robot to figure that number out with, and we don't have all their data. So I think it's an area where those escalations are so challenging when a business is moving into a new unknown space and trying to innovate, especially when culturally, I always forget his last name. Your friend Joe Mullins, I think it's last. Yeah. Thank you. I've listened to him quite a few times. Like within J&J culturally, we communicate that we are an innovative business. Externally, we hear these semantics that these big strategics can't innovate. They have to acquire in order to enter new markets. And I saw so many engineers with projects and innovations underneath their desks that they'd work on in the shadows, and they try to bring it to light of day. And if it doesn't fit our perfect commercial cadence, and it just, you're always sending stuff to the graveyard because you're more focused on how do you get through design verification on a product that fits within the perfect scope. It's iterative typically, as opposed to transformative. And if you want to be transformative, you have to go out and acquire or do build to buy. But there's this big cultural mismatch, because I think, at least for us engineers navigating college, we want to create and build, and then we enter a large corporate like that has the cash flow, but not necessarily the appetite for those risks.
Yeah.
So within the startup world, which is more the Wild West in some capacities, like how do you span that tension? Because a surgical system to build from the ground up is incredibly complex, and to build an architecture like that requires really thoughtful design, but also deep understanding of the market and the use cases. You have the regulatory bodies, you have reimbursement, which procedures you're going after. There's so many different pockets that how could somebody just go out and start something? in that space?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, I'm gonna always bring this back to this.
Yeah.
Why are you building a robot? Start with there, right? So if your answer is because I want to hang my staplers on it, okay, that's a very different ethos than I want to build the world's best robot that mimics laparoscopy. They're two very different concepts, two different reasons, core truths of why you do it. And you've got to be able to hold up a lens at some point all the time. When you're looking at any project, you have to be able to hold up a lens and look through a lens. And if the lens is, let's get our stapler, build the world's best stapling robot, right? And that's what it's going to be. And that gives everyone the direction. But then humans are really funny things, actually. We especially young human engineers who come out of very smart engineering schools, and I've met a lot of them in my time, they think that you have to start from first principles every time, because that's one of the ways that we get taught and educated. And in fact, quite often you talk about, don't reinvent the wheel. Well, there's probably a couple of 65-year-old amazing wheel makers out in the industry. Yeah, don't worry about your kids, by the way. Let them go. Just let them go for it.
I know.
Let them enjoy it. This is how people realize it's real. Our conversations. These are not weird, stilted conversations. This is real. And again, we can talk about this later. Balancing home life and work life. You got to do it, and you should never be embarrassed if your kids or your dog's barking or the Amazon truck coming or stuff like that. Don't worry about it. You should always roll with it. So yeah, let it rage.
Crazy.
Let it rage. Let it rage. So don't always start from first principles. Sometimes you have to. But there's usually a good wheel maker out there, and you don't need all the old wheel makers. They'll tell you how you made the wheel in the past, but go and listen to their wisdom around a campfire. Go and talk to them a bit. Bring them in. Let them talk to you a little bit. Let them explain to you why wheels are round, right? Why was the wheel round and not square? Let them talk a little bit about the history and the mystery. Let them talk a little bit about the why and where they got to, and why did the wheel end up this thin, this thick, this heavy, this whatever in the past. Doesn't mean it's the way forward, because rear view mirrors don't always show you the way forwards. But at least you don't have to start from the first principles. Okay, we need something round. Okay, well, that's maybe not the most perfect way of getting it round, etc. So when you're starting out, understand where you want to go. That's the primary thing. Then what you want to do is work out the journey path to get there. And you don't have to do it all yourself from first principles. Work out, first of all, has anyone been there before? Has anyone done this before? And if they have, how do we get a little bit of at least guidance and help? And the most important thing you can ever get in your career is not the how to do it. It's the how to not mess it up again, because we've already messed it up 30 times that way, right? That's what saves people in business more than anything. Making mistakes is absolutely great. Repeating your own mistakes is a bit stupid, but repeating mistakes that have been well documented for the last 15 years is just unacceptable. That's just, you've just been so arrogant that you think you're the only one who could even think of doing this. And you go out and make the same mistakes that 100 other people have done over 15 years and documented it and published on it and shown it wisely that you don't do it that way. That's how you kill a startup very fast, or a project within a company. That's why you end up with a robotics project in a big corporation taking 15 years and you're still not on the market. Because instead of having a little bit of humility and going out and doing it, and again, it's not that people are being bad. People are trying to do their best every day. But sometimes experience beats intelligence quite often. Scissors is a great example. I could go on for a long time about scissors, but getting a pair of Metzenbaum scissors to cut well on a laparoscopic instrument or a robot looks pretty easy. It's really, really hard. I mean, really hard.
Yeah, I was friends with the team at J&J.
Okay.
That was a hard one. Cables were hard. We've never done cables.
Cables are very hard. But there's people out there that have. You see, there's people out there that have done a lot of cables. There's people out there who've done cabling in a lot of other industries. In fact, one of the interesting things people don't know, there's a company called Teleflex. And Teleflex, their original business was actually making cables so when you were driving a boat and you drove the steering wheel of a boat, they were the people who made the cables that went through the pulleys and moved your engine. So, they got into medical device because it's big cables made small through small pulleys. But there are experts out there. There's entire companies that do nothing but cable. You know, there's 2 or 3 West Coast Cable or someone. There's just people out there, and you know, you go in there and you look through your catalog and you select your material because you look at the properties of the material, and you decide that it's going to be this kind of braid, and you're going to decide it's going to be this material, it's going to be stainless steel because it's going to be this kind of stainless steel because it's quite flexible and malleable, but it's strong, but it's okay from a cost point of view. If you'd have gone and talked to the cable expert who's done nothing but 65 years of cables through pulleys way smaller than that and under stress is way higher than that, they would say, oh, no, you can't use a stainless steel cable on that. Oh, no, you can't use that kind of braid on it because that thing will just start fraying and it'll snap and it'll only get you to 3 lives. And you don't have time to be learning the errors. Go and search out some experts on scissors. Go to someone who's been at Esculap for 55 years and built Metzenbaum scissors, and his dad showed him how to make Metzenbaum scissors. They understand the leaf spring of the blades, and they understand the blade interactions, and they understand. Sorry, for those not knowing, Metzenbaum scissors, it's like a kind of curved scissor that you use a lot in very fine surgery, and you only want the point of intersection to be cutting. And it's a huge art to get to it. But there's people who that's all they've done their entire lives, and nobody asks them. So again, I think just a little bit of humility when we go into these projects, alignment on where we were trying to get to, understand the pathway that we kind of want to go there because you're going to end up zigzagging, and then find people who've at least trodden parts of that path before, and you should be able to get to a fairly good solution faster, cheaper, and with less errors.
Excellent. I'm just having so many moments of my past coming up with discussions in the
Flashbacks.
hallways. Oh my gosh, so many. Like we brought
PTSD.
well, yes, you talk about bringing in an expert. I can't disclose the person, obviously, for protection, but we headhunted someone from Intuitive right off the bat, and they were a great mentor for me in the early robotics days because we realized we have no idea how to make things do this. Like it's just outside of our wheelhouse. And they came in with different architecture suggestions based on what they had worked on, and it moved the business forward so well. But we still had pain points because we had one person, like, and then we had all of our Ethiconian historic instrument excellence thought life there, but nothing robotics. So every discussion was like, how do I adapt what I'm used to into this new world, as opposed to if we started from scratch, what's the right architecture? And you're trying to leverage existing components for efficiency, but then that puts challenges on usability, which we won't get into that.
No. Well,
so,
but again, so let's just talk about that for a second. So sometimes big and legacy can help you in certain things. You know, if you're doing supplier negotiations, or you know, you're talking with contract manufacturers, or you've got a list, a Rolodex, it can help you. It can help you a lot. But in equal spades, it can really stop you as well, because you try and force everything into your square box of the legacy.
yes, absolutely.
And sometimes in innovation, you just can't do that. And what can also happen is, and this is very specific to robotics, and I imagine, you know, when you had like your Google Lites and your whatever they're called, what are they called? I can't remember what they're called. Google It's or
Google Glass or
no, the Google people who come from Google.
Oh yeah, life science folks.
Yeah, so you've got Google people, you've got young engineers coming out of MIT and Stanford and all this, and they're all just, you know, the world is full of hope and amazingness and invention and all this kind of stuff. And you've got these grizzled engineers who've been in Cincinnati, you know, basically waiting for the pension for, you know, the last 5 years, having to sit through 6,000 review meetings, and the finance people keep cutting their things, and they've got, you know, just baggage by thing, and those two worlds just crash into each other. That's what, you know, myself and Joe talk about all the time, that it's not that the people from Cincinnati or the people from wherever, in whichever company, are bad. They're not. They're different, right? And some of those people will be amazing when it comes to design for manufacturing for scale up. But you have to try and keep those two worlds apart as long as possible, or just have points of interaction. You don't try and put the two worlds on top of each other. It's a Venn diagram. It's not two circles completely overlapping. And that's again why anyone who's been and done this a lot understands that the architecture behind the teams is crucial. It's crucial how you architect these teams, and especially if you're bringing a new technology, an entire new world to an established company. How that's done has to be done so delicately and carefully. And too often, what happens in all big companies, they try and just smash the two things together, and that's usually when you end up with a train wreck.
And it was, I mean, looking back over the 10 years I was in that world, I was in robotics for about 8 before I moved out to Japan. It was a smashing and unsmashing. Like
Yeah.
everyone from both sides would interact, and then communication would explode, and there's no alignment. And then communication would only go through a handful of people, and then it would converge. Like it kept coming in and out based on each leader coming back and forth, teams crossing over, everyone on the same team, everyone on different teams, us potentially doing an acquisition just because we needed to feel like we're all on the same team. There's all kinds of politics. It made it very difficult to understand what we were building towards and why, as things continued to shift out from under us as we moved across platforms. Because I worked across so many early architectures, so many adaptions, and I will say there are many engineers in Cincinnati that are absolutely incredible, and they've built remarkable products. And it's just, let's see what we could do in a robotics world. Like, can we adapt into that space? It's a fun space to imagine where it goes from here.
It's the problem. If you're just trying to retrofit a robot onto your staples or your advanced energy, you end up with a very different concept as a retrofit. I think that companies have to be very careful about doing that, because you end up then with the worst of all worlds. You end up with the worst of a robot, with the worst of the staple. That's your risk, right? Or it just takes you 10 years longer than it should do, because you have to keep working out, well, that wasn't the optimal way to do it. Let's unwind that and relearn and do it again. So again, I think myself and Joe talk about build to buy, because there are two big cultural differences here. And I'm a big firm believer that you should have, if you're in a company, you should have teams that are trying to destroy your business. I think they should be trying to out-innovate your business. So,
like outside of front end. So you're basically taking some folks and figure out how to compete against your own core business unit.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So let's take an example. So you've got an energy device, okay? And I'm not talking J&J or Medtronic. Let's just say you're a company with an energy device, and it's a standard type of energy device. I would have a team, if that's your core business. There are 50 startups out there trying to work out how to disrupt and destroy your business, but you're not usually one of them. What you're there is trying to work out how you take 5 cents out of the production cost. And that's a very small iterative. And that's important for as long as the line remains there. And there's great engineers who are brilliant at doing that. But you also need a group of rebels that are trying to work out how to make your business defunct, because they're stress testing your system. They are going to bring lessons back into you of areas of weakness. And if you don't do it, somebody else is. Now, that doesn't mean that team has to destroy that energy device. But what they'll bring back in, if it's done well, is all the vulnerabilities of your energy device. And they will be probably the same vulnerabilities that everybody else is working on. And a classic example of this is at the minute, which is with ablation, atrial fibrillation ablation. Everyone was working on the kind of you were doing hardcore burning ablation, and other people worked out, well, actually, if you use pulsed fields, which are lower in intensity, but you can get similar or better tissue effects through pulsed field ablation rather than direct sort of burning ablation. Again, the hardcore ablaters, they wouldn't be looking at it, but you had a team that was saying, how do you do that tissue effect in a better way? I think the companies that do that either end up with a better product anyway, because they make their own product defunct, or they work out what's wrong with their current product, make that better, and make it more defensible against the competition that's going to come. So I think it helps both ways. No matter which way you do it, it helps. But I don't think companies have got the guts to do it that often. They're too busy focused on the quarterly results and just trying to
The
fix the
P&Ls
stuff.
driving the front end to pursue the next iterative with their headcount,
Yes.
as opposed to actually looking at competitive
Yeah.
innovation.
Yeah.
Build a business kind of innovation.
and I was at Device Talks Boston, and Ivan Tornos, who's the CEO of Zimmer Biotech, did a brilliant talk. And I was in awe of him talking about this, because I think he's got it right. He was trying to work out they're a company, they're a company built on hips and knees, and he was working out, how do we stop the need for patients to have hips and knees? That's a person who's thinking. That's a leader who's really trying to understand.
Okay, so this would be innovation oncology then.
Yeah.
In J&J's approach on like, how do we even get outside of just surgical interventions and look beyond with
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
and that's been, I supported that work as well.
Yeah.
There's some fun spaces there,
and it's good, and the answer is, I'm going to do a whole series of articles on this. And again, sorry, I'm going to get a bit technical here for some
no,
of
you're
your
fine,
listeners
I'll
who
add
are
all the definitions, you're good.
medical device, but a lot of surgery today is performed, which is amputative surgery. You basically take big lumps of your body out. So that's going to be replaced in the next 30 years by either earlier treatments that mean that you don't get the full bowel cancer, so you don't need your whole bowel out. You just have a small thing like in what they call an ESD, or an endoscopic submucosal dissection. You have it done with an endoscope inside your bowel rather than chopping your whole bowel out. This is going to come thick and fast with a lot of metabolic therapies. It's going to come thick and fast with things like histosonics and histotripsy. It's going to come thick and fast with combination therapies, where things like mRNA vaccines will be used in conjunction with ablation, in conjunction with histotripsy and things. And there'll be a whole evolution. But the problem is, if you spend your life just looking inside your surgical box, and the answer is a better stapler, a better scalpel, a better whatever, you're going to miss the large change. And a lot of people would have heard of Ozempic and GLP-1 drugs. A lot of bariatric surgery has either gone away or been delayed. Some of it's delayed, but a lot of bariatric surgery has gone away. That wasn't making a better bariatric stapler. There's going to be pills that are going to replace a lot of surgery in the future, and surgery is going to decline by 30%. And I think that one of the things that J&J is a good example has got is they've got their pharma division, and a lot of their pharma stuff is going to wipe out a lot of their surgery stuff. And I think it's right. If I have the choice, I can just take a pill rather than have my bowel taken out. Sign me up, right? So I think it's good. But there are shades of gray between the pill and the surgery. And I think some of the big companies need to get better at iterating their current designs, but also innovating their current designs out of existence. And I had this great diagram years ago, which had there was two teams. There was iterators and innovators. And the iterators had a job to reduce cost, make it better, make the next longer, stronger staple, make it blah, blah. And the innovator's job was to be constantly chasing them to make them redundant. And I think if you can get that tension going, it's good. And as a startup, you naturally fall. You've got no cash cow to preserve. You've got no P&L that you're chasing. You're starting with a blank sheet. And what you, not always, but generally do, is you look at a market and say, how do I disrupt them? So the startup's going to do it if you don't do it as a big company. So you may as well do it as a big company as well.
This is super helpful. To build on that, I have two questions I could ask. Which way do I want this to go? I'm going to save the question that'll kind of build towards actually looking at pharmaceutical assets and where they can cross over within surgery. We'll see if we can get to it. But the next one I want to ask to kind of ground the conversation is, I'm a 90s baby. So like when I began my journey as a design engineer at Ethicon, it was incredibly humbling to connect with all the engineering wizards that were cranking out clip appliers and surgical staplers before I was in preschool. I actually met with them for design changes in life cycle. Is why did you make this component this exact way? And they had to like rewind 30 years to think about what they did in that product.
Yeah.
So I love uncovering stories of how different innovation and surgery was versus where it is and where it's going, because it kind of it gives us an origin story. So I would love to hear, like, you got into Ethicon, you said at 20 by line
Yep.
into sales. And I heard a recent video you made just about some of that experience, but help me understand what you learned in those very formative years, just interacting with clinicians, being proximal, positioning our products, having dinners with them, like the way it was before, how it is now with compliance, and how you carry that into marketing and ultimately into CMR.
Yeah.
And just the way that you seem, again, intricately connected with the needs of clinicians. It always seems to go back towards them and the outcomes for patients. And I'm curious
Yeah.
if that roots back to your sales days.
Yeah, it does. It also starts with some of the first interactions I had in surgery where, patients died on the table, and
Mm-hmm.
it got real pretty quick. Within my first week of being with Ethicon, it was nothing to do with the product. It was an aortic aneurysm and the patient just didn't make it. That became very real very fast for me. And I started realizing from literally within the first week, the shit that we do on a daily basis can affect people whether they live or die. That was a very initial raw moment for me to really hit me with a lot of power. And what I learned early on was, I didn't know anything about surgery. I was a physiologist. I do anatomy, physiology. I was insanely curious about surgery, but I'd never been in a hospital, never been in surgery before, and I was fascinated by it. And I think that one of the things that really made me understand in those early days, especially I was very fortunate that we went from open to laparoscopic surgery. No one was doing, there was no lap chole when I joined. It didn't exist.
Yep.
Like they'd done
It's
some
incredible.
Kurt Sem and some people had sort of like been messing with it. Even in the 70s, they'd been messing with it, but it wasn't a thing as such. So what I saw was this change where surgeons were also learning, right? There was this amazing vulnerability because before I'd gone in there, I imagined that surgeons were like all powerful gods who just, had this life-saving ability, and how could they have doubts or knowledge gaps or whatever? And I learned in those early 90s, 91, 92, 93, as we got into laparoscopy, I was teaching them laparoscopy. Okay, which was because we did more than they did, and we were taken to Cincinnati, and there wasn't even Cincinnati built when I started, but eventually we took them to Cincinnati. We took them to Paris at first. It was actually a guy called Joe Lamont had a training lab in Paris, and we were basically learning with them. And what that taught me early on in my sales career was that when you had that trust and confidence with a surgeon, and the ultimate goal between both of you was the improvement of the patient outcome, and you needed to be able to talk with them on an eye-to-eye level. When they talked the jargon of surgery, you needed to be able to do it, and you also needed to bring something to the table. And I mean literally the table, the operating room table. So in those days, I used to scrub in and, used to assist and tie their knots and fire staplers and stuff because that's just how it was back in those days.
Because you're a surgeon as well, from
Well,
a clinical support perspective.
more or less, yeah. It was weird. So, but it was very, very. It was a kind of a seminal moment for me that said when you bring value to helping patient care, that's the ultimate strive and the ultimate trigger that builds the bond between the company and the surgeon. When you go in to do a transaction, which is, I want you to buy my thing so I get commission.
Yep.
That is very hollow. And surgeons are incredibly brilliant, smart people. They are. And they are also very determined to make sure that patients get better. That is, I don't think I've met a surgeon who didn't, at one level or another, really believe in making the patients better. And understanding that when you bring that connection, that you bring something to the party, you bring something to the level, you can talk with them at eye level, and you get their respect. That is a really critical point. And you saw it in the early days of Ethicon endosurgery. There was a lot of people that understood that because we went through that baptism by fire of the birth of we birthed together, or as somebody called it the other day, we midwifed together the birth of the laparoscopy.
Yeah.
And Ethicon endosurgery was born in those days, and we created what we call the sales mastery classes and the whole training. And I tell you, there's probably my generation, a lot of us out there who could do surgery as well as surgeons in certain aspects, not everything, but we were good, right? And we understood surgery. And I carry that with me today. I can watch a procedure and I understand it as if, inside out. I know exactly what's happening. I think that's been lost a little bit, that art. And it's CMR. I think we brought it back a lot. The people that were in CMR, we hired for those kind of people who were so insanely curious that they would go and find that out. And the people that went and supported all the clinical cases or went into the clinical cases from the commercial team, I mean, they really knew their stuff. There's a guy called Kin Chung. Kin Chung is ex-J&J, did staples at J&J, went to Intuitive, did staples at Intuitive, went on, sold the census, came to CMR. I mean, I trust that guy to take my prostate out, and he's not a surgeon.
Yep.
He's
he
not,
just knows.
He knows it, right? He knows it. And if I have a question about some kind of urological small nuance, I'll pick up the phone to him and ask him as much as any surgeon, because he'll get it also from a commercial point of view and from a company point of view. And that's where I think, again, I'm going to give advice to everyone who's out there. Be insanely curious, but not just about the engineering, about the patient and the patient impact, the patient journey, how the hospitals work, how surgery works. Why does anatomy, why when I cut here does it matter? It's important to understand machine tissue interaction. It's important to understand patient impact. It's important to understand, why does the surgeon get frustrated when they can't get this angle? This is so deeply inherent. And if you can stand there and articulate with clinical staff or with hospital staff, even the management, but you can articulate in a very professional and profound way and bring them solutions that make their patient outcome better, that's when the magic happens. That's when the reflection between the two mirrors happens. And it's that reflection between the two mirrors that's the third thing that emerges, that is the important thing. And if you never get to that emergence of that third thing between you and the healthcare providers, you won't get there. And in the old days, a lot of that would come because we would have dinners together, and we would sit and we would philosophize. Well, what if we could, I would sit with people like John Lotz at Stafford, and he'd say, I'm frustrated because every time I use your hernia stapler, which was called the ES 100 at the day, I have to take it out and reload each staple into it and put it back in. And I lose peritoneum and I lose my direction. And it's just a pain. What would be great is if you have a multi-fire stapler. They're the kind of conversations that happen over a dinner, right? So a lot of the pioneering stuff that came out that helped me in my career, that I would also feed back to the engineers, would be, John's struggling. He really doesn't want to be putting his stapler in and out. He needs a multifier. It's so important. And that's the marketing insight of a good strategic marketeer who doesn't listen what the surgeon wants. He didn't say, I want a multifier. What he said is, I don't want to be taking the stapler out and in and out and out and out and in. And the good engineers say, well, we could make a cartridge with stacked staples that could then drive the staples forward one after another and bang, bang, bang. So these are the sort of things that came out. I remember very clearly with David Cade, great surgeon at Leighton Hospital in Crewe. By the way, I've got a weird memory for this stuff. I don't know why, but I can remember
it's a good memory. It's gold.
I can remember in his first lap chole that we did together, and we were in there. And in those days, we had a 10 millimeter trocar, which is a port, which is the tubes that go into the patient. And it was 10 millimeters. And if you put a thin 5 millimeter instrument into it, the gas would all come out. So you had to put something called a reducer. And in those days, it was a sleeve in a sleeve that you put in, put your finger over, and then put it through. And he said, I need some kind of automatic reduction cap. And Ethicon came up with not a great invention, which was a flip cap. At the time, it was a flip. And then Applied Medical actually came up with a universal seal, as it was called, which was, it allowed you to put in from a 12 mil to a 5 mil instrument without loss of gas. Very clever invention. A lot of lawsuits over it in the day. But David's need was, I need to be able to put a 5 millimeter instrument into this 10 millimeter port sometimes and not lose gas. And when I say it that way, it's obvious, right? But if he comes around and says, I need a super port that crosses over and all these shutters come across and grab it, or I need my 5mm instrument. What I actually want is a 5mm instrument with a balloon on it that expands. Okay, the want and the need are two very different things. And I think, again, people setting off in their careers, especially engineers, stop listening to wants. Get a good strategic marketeer to tease out what's the problem, what's the need, what's the underlying issue that we're trying to resolve here. And that runs all the way back from product features, product improvements, but to why do I even do this in the first place? So if the need is I need to build a robot because I need to compete with intuitive. That's actually a really bad need. That's a want. I want to compete with intuitive. That's a want. That's not a need. You don't end up designing feature sets that actually meet needs that will give you that competitive advantage. You end up with a pale imitation of what's out there because your want was stronger than your need or misunderstood for your need. I hope that makes sense.
No, I mean, it makes a ton of sense. And just to kind of ground the conversation and maybe land with another case study, if you could go a couple minutes over.
Yeah, I've got
I
all day.
Okay, like I worked in surgical robotics as an engineer for 8 years at Ethicon, and during that time, I saw one robotic hysterectomy case. For 8 years, developing surgical instruments, doing robotics controls, doing systems engineering, and cascading requirements from customer requirements all the way down into performance level and across the subsystems. And then when I had the opportunity to relocate to Japan, where I directed front-end innovation, that was more of a marketing engineering hybrid role. I traveled the whole region. I attended surgeons with tons of top tier KOLs. I did ethnographic research leveraging Stanford biodesign. I did post-operative interviews to really understand with clarity, like what are the unmet needs we're navigating in different disease states. And then I led an ecosystem of scrappy folks across different contexts to try to prioritize these within R&D pipeline. And then I ran into challenges with maybe strategics aren't that innovative. Right? Like some of the areas that we could go, it's hard to get them immediately adopted within pipeline, which is my job to get alignment there. But I will say being proximal to a clinician and seeing those candid pain points and having those conversations is so valuable. And we're looking at ways to scale those insights through VR and other ways so that you create a repository of unmet needs. So any engineer from J&J or eventually any engineer globally or any startup could look at what are these unmet needs, a way to blink in a given population in order to, it's like the biodesign language. How do you create an ecosystem of these insights that is available globally so that all the strategics, all the startups can look at what these needs are and look at the nuance from country to country as well, because techniques are different. And then figure out where you prioritize either global innovation or regionalized innovation where appropriate. That was like the grand vision I started working towards, and it made me love marketing and it made me love sales, being in proximity to top sales reps or top KOLs. I want more of that in the future because I think that's what helps you figure out what you should build towards next. It's actually talking with your customers as opposed to looking at the tech you have and figure out how do I make it more tech? How do I just keep it
I agree.
right?
So that's really down to leadership. Okay, so back in the day in gynae care, brilliant. Work with people like Mike Tracy, work with people like Dan Smith, Scott Shirocca. A lot of the team that were in gynae care was brilliant. And the reason for that was there was this harmonious togetherness. There was Laura Angelini. Actually, Barbara Schwartz was very good at it as well. Zach Carino. And they allowed us all to intermingle. It was one intermingled team because the leadership didn't have any big bruised egos where they had to keep sales in their box and they had to keep marketing in their box and they had to keep engineers in their box. And you know what? The software guys were not allowed to talk to the ladies who make the instruments, and they were not allowed to talk to this team. They were not allowed to talk to that team. It was just really a thought leadership by people like Laura, who understood that the engineers are the people who are going to make the product, but the strategic marketeers were the ones who make to understand it. The salespeople are the ones who are going to have to sell it, and making a product and selling a product are two different things. So I think it comes down to leadership, and you do see that in some companies. It's still very, very good that you have this kind of less vertical hierarchy. But then what happens is you end up, you get into companies where arrogance or leadership or politics or whatever it be, right? I could name 15 companies. And I was in a company where one of the people who'd actually come up with the product had never been in the operating room. And it wasn't until years after the product was being used in lots and lots of patients that they actually saw it being used. And, great, the product worked, but could that have been shortcutted? Could that have been done in a different way if they'd have gone in there? I'm a big fan. I would demand in every startup, the engineers are living for 6 months in the operating room and they're doing their engineering sitting on a stool in the engineering room. Excuse me, in the operating room.
It's so good. I mean,
Yeah.
like one of my key mentors. I don't know if you crossed paths with Paul Hojnacki. I can never say his name right, but he was in engineering. He moved into sales because he wanted those touch points, and then he came back into global strategic marketing. So he was over a lot of our wristed instruments and robotics, and he was a great mentor to me as I was moving between engineering and global leadership. I eventually moved into entrepreneurship, but I felt like we had to label as engineers of like he was one of the good ones out of marketing because he understood the needs and he understood the technology. Like he spanned it. So as folks are specialized into different divisions, how like that 6 month rotation is really interesting of just
Oh yeah.
changing your environment.
Yeah.
Where are other rotations where you see that being valuable for people to pursue, even though it might be a lateral move in their journey, it might be a step back from comp, even? How do you encourage people to step across to have that longer term perspective on personal development? Because you've moved all over before you ended up
Yeah.
CEOing and CCOing,
Yeah.
all the
So,
O's.
so yeah, well, there's a lot of C's in there. Um, I think part of it comes down to insatiable, the appetite for my curiosity gets the better of me, right? I can't have a product and not take it to pieces. I have to understand how it fundamentally works underneath, even if I'm just selling it. I used to do it with staplers. I do it, I went and saw the suture production many times to try and understand, why is the Ethicon suture so damn good? And you go and watch it and you sit with the engineers and you talk with the needle engineers and you work out how they make those things and how they swage them, the laser drilling and the way that they do the extrusion of the PDS versus how others do it, and annealing and all this kind of great stuff that goes into it. And if you understand that, if you understand how a robot works or a stapler works or an energy device works or a stent works or an implantable defibrillator, however, I believe anybody who touches a device should almost be able to build it. I'm a firm believer in that. Definitely all of the team that was at CMR, the commercial team, could more or less do what we called semi-wizarding, which was, they were able to do some basic log stuff with laptops and stuff on the arms in the demos. This was really important, and we had a great relationship with the engineering team. There was a couple of people there, a lot of favorites in that place. But Patrick Thornycroft, David Hall, brilliant people. Just loved working with them. Loved working with the software engineers as well, because I think when you get that bond and you work together, that's when the magic happens. Again, it's the thing, but the reflection between the mirrors, and you've got to spend time with it. I mean, people think I'm weird, right? This is going to sound really weird, but I would spend whole evenings in the demo room at CMR, nurturing the robot, just playing with it and understanding it and stress testing it. And quite often I'd have some of the engineers in there with me as well, because I'd often break it because I would test it to its limits. And I think this insatiable curiosity, if that goes both ways, and engineers spend lots of times with people who really know surgery or really know sales, I think it all starts to rub off. And I think that I would encourage multidisciplinary teams, not the marketing department. I would never name it again. I don't think the marketing department. I would not allow that to happen. I would create something different, which just has groups of people with multi-skill capabilities and knowledge, because we don't all own the knowledge, right? So I think that you'll be able to get a way better result way faster than the silo mentality. But part of the problem with silo mentality is it gets driven by finance and it gets driven by HR. And the reason for that is that finance wants to know the marketing budget. Okay, they want to know the software engineer's budget. They want to know the headcount in software. I think we think about it in the wrong way. You know, when you're in an early startup, there is no marketing department. There's somebody who's charged with doing some marketing, and there's some engineers. But you know, quite often, you know, when I was with people like Wayne Noda out in California, you know, it was both of us lugging the toolbox upstairs and sitting there and ordering the glue off Amazon or whatever. You know, it was both of us. It was the engineer and me, and it's Daniel Hyman and the guys there. I just loved being with those people, lived in that environment. And I think that the sad thing about the big companies is that you end up with these silos because of the way the functionality has to work. I think it's the worst thing you can do.
Oh my gosh, this is so valuable. Thank you so much, Steve, for all of these answers. We'll do like 1 to 1.5 more questions, and then I think I have to feed my kids. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. That probably takes more precedence because I'll feed myself.
Oh my gosh, no, this is fantastic. So let's do, like, you have a training course on how to start up a med tech. It's got 100 modules of videos with you sharing all the scars, breaking through people's barriers so that they can actually go and progress these ventures on behalf of clinicians, which is hard and challenging. It takes risks to actually build something new. And what I thought would be fun is we could do a quick mini robotic startup together. I'll give you a case study based on something I saw in Japan. And then you could just fire off like 5 to 7 mini tips that would help move the needle forward in that startup as much as possible based on the current climate. And to provide kind of context on this for folks who don't know much in this space. So there's build to buy models where a large strategic, a big company like Johnson & Johnson will start a small company and give it money and then let it do its thing, and then they have priority to acquire it. That's one pathway. The pathway that CRM went is you could work with venture capitalists to raise a whole bunch of funds and build it your own way from the ground up, and then you run into pain points downstream with a commercial and a potential buyer, which is happening, which is cool. Congrats on that, even though you're not in it. But it's complicated.
But I hope they do. But I do hope they do. And I just want to talk about that. So it's CMR Surgical, and there was a rumor from the Financial Times yesterday, which didn't seem that concrete, but if it comes out of the Financial Times, it's usually strong. And I think that it's an amazing technology. It's a brilliant technology, and if it could go into a strategic, it would really be allowed to change the world on a bigger scale. It changes the world today. I think it does an amazing job. But I think if they could do that, besides the financial side of it for everybody, I think that it would actually be a really good thing for the world. I think it would be an amazing thing for patients, an amazing thing for healthcare providers. And I think it would take surgery forward in leaps and bounds, just to say on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, having this Steve, I can't think of endorsement is fantastic in those spaces. So the scenario I want to lay out, right? A casual observer of the space might notice that, you know, Intuitive has multiple, that you have your boom robots. You also have Ion, which allows you to do endoluminal work thoracically for diagnosis of small lesions. And then Ethicon Johnson & Johnson has acquired Auris Surgical, which also has an endoluminal surgical system. They're launching Otava in future-ish. They're doing clinical cases right now. One can imagine scenarios where you can move towards concomitant procedures, where you're working through traditional laparoscopic surgery, also endoluminal, either transhoracically, transanally. And we've also talked about pharmaceutical assets, and there's potentials of injecting localized pharmaceutical assets to treat cancer. The end-to-end clinical workflows in that space is completely new, unknown, and different in some regards, right? You have to create new procedural workflows. You have to have interventional pulmonologists working with thoracic surgeons in those spaces. So the curiosity I have is if you wanted to venture out and create a endoluminal robotic surgical system, you could pick whichever disease specialty you want, whether it's thoracic, colorectal, with the capabilities of pharmaceuticals, interventions. Amidst the current climate of strategics, would you be in conversations with Medtronic as another thing on a cart? Would you be looking to start your own thing through VC? Like, give us 5 to 7 key killer questions or activities you would progress to get something off the ground in that space, whether it's the team you would build, the board you would
Yeah.
create, how you'd raise capital, like where would you go in this clinical ambiguous space?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's several routes you could go on this. So let's say it's an endoscopy robot for doing in the colon. Okay, so it's like an
Hmm.
endoscope that you would do your colonoscopy, but
Yep.
it will work, or it will deliver drugs, it will deliver energy, or it will have a radar system so you can work from both sides. And when you say
Hmm.
concomitant procedures, for those that don't know, this is where you
Hmm.
meet in the middle. So you come from one side and the other, often called rendezvous. You'll rendezvous and you'll do something across the bowel. So that the fundamental thing, if I was blank sheet of paper, I would start with the why. Why do I even want to do this in the first place? I'm about to spend the next 12 years of my life minimum, which is what it is. And I'm probably going to have a high risk of getting a divorce again. And I'm not going to probably see my kids much. And I'm going to be traveling around the world like a lunatic. And I'm going to be every night worrying, are we going to go bankrupt? Okay. So there better be a really important why at the beginning of it. So that would be part number one. Why am I doing this? And if it's just because it's cool and I've worked out a really good way to make little things move in this way, that's a really bad idea. Really bad idea. And you should just kill that idea immediately and never get going. But if it's because I'm a driven human being and I've seen friends of mine have their lungs taken out or their bowel taken out or organs removed when they really didn't need to be. And then they've had horrific consequences of that for the rest of their life, and they didn't need to have. And I've come up with a way and an idea, I think, that we can approach this and I can avoid all that human suffering. And with that comes the avoidance of some cost. And with that means that they don't lose their job. And with that comes A, B, and C. And I have a deep rooted, orientated why of I think I can do better for human beings, and that's why I want to do it. That's a good starting point. So I would start there. I would try and understand, do I have a really good, and the reason for that is, and I teach this on the course, um, this is not about products. It's about a mission. The product will change. The mission can't. As long as the mission is, I want to avoid people having their bowels out. What I end up with doesn't actually matter, as long as it does what I set out to do. And quite often, the first idea you have is the wrong idea. That's a very common thing that happens in startups. So that's how I start there. Then, interestingly, and this is where I think 90% of people get this wrong, is they don't ask at that stage, all right, I know why I'm doing this. What's the end point? What's the end point of this? It can't just be a research project with no end. That's not a business. So if I'm getting into the med tech business, I have to work out what's the business end of this. The product's going to work. I'm going to commercialize it. But what do I then do with it? So this comes a little bit to the philosophy of, it comes back in a circle, but three ways that I end the story. One is I make a successful company like Intuitive that just keeps building and building and building. And I could stay as a private in that way, or I could raise capital from the markets and do an IPO, send it to the market, put it on the stock exchange. So I've got keep it as a private, put it on the stock exchange, or get bought by somebody bigger who could do more of this, either a private equity or a big company like a J&J or something. But I need to understand the end in mind, because philosophically, I have to understand why I'm doing it. Ultimately, all three require to create a really good business with great revenues and great profit. All three. And that's the mistake people make. If I just make it good enough, someone will buy it. I don't have to worry about the commercialization. No, not in 2025. So what's my likely ending? Well, my likely ending is I want an Olympus to buy it, or a Pentax or a Fuji, right? Because they're in that space and they actually probably could serve those customers better than we could. So there's two options then. I can build it all myself, go and raise money from friends, families, and fools initially. Then I can bootstrap it up a bit, but then I can go and raise some venture capital money, do a Series A, Series B, then maybe some bigger institutional investors. Can do that way and go through the whole, I'll build it, I'll control it. Or I could go to someone like an Olympus or a Fuji or a Pentax and say, look, are you guys interested in like looking at this area? Because I see that you've got Endo Samurai in your past thing that was a failed project. You obviously thought about it, you're still thinking about it, and you're seeing the way the trends are going. You have a good conversation with them. And what they might say is, yeah, we can, but we don't think we can do it. This is when you can say to them, well, how would you like me to build this for you? Because I've got a very powerful why. And I think the right thing is a strategic take here. Why don't I just build it for you? And we stay off your balance sheet because you don't give us that much money. But if you're the anchor investor, I can then raise money, blah, 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 and go through that. So that would be my next thing is the end point decides which of those two end paths I go, and therefore which funding strategy I'm going to build around it. So I'm starting to connect the dots between the end and the beginning. But if I don't think of the end at the same time I think of the beginning, you can't do that. That's the big failing of most companies. They just start and say every adventure starts with a first step, and they just keep stepping and stepping and stepping, and they go all over the place. Then in the middle of that, I think to myself, okay, so they're going to do it. I can't do this alone. I'm good, but I'm not that good. I'm going to need some engineers, and I'm going to need, and this is where we come back to what I said before about the connections a little bit. So I'm going to say, okay, I would be saying, how do I make my ultimate hit team that I'm going to live with for 12 years? I'm going to sit in airports every Friday night with. I'm probably going to spend most weekends at congresses with, every day in the office with them. I'm going to be on Zoom calls nearly every night when my wife is going absolutely crazy at me to get off the Zoom calls. I better like these people, trust these people, be able to engage with these people, and they better have the same why and the same endpoint. So that's the next thing. I'm going to fund it. Have they got credibility? Will they help me to get it funded? Can they bring funders to the table? Can they bring connections? Can they bring people to the table? So it's the whole people element of it that's going to be around it. And then let's say, right, brakes on. This is where you put the brakes on and say, this is great. We've got this concept of where we're going to go. And I would not be starting with, I'm going to make an endoscopic robot. That might be the wrong answer. So I know what I want to do and why. I know where it wants to go, and I know the sort of people who want to buy it. I know the people I want to do it with and the funding mechanisms I'm going to do for this. Is anyone going to buy this? Can anyone buy this? Is there any money in endoscopy? And the answer is actually no, there's not. There is no money in endoscopy to sustain a robot. Oh, okay. Well, so the endoscopist maybe not going to do this. Right. Is there any more? Okay. Well, they're willing to pay, if they could, $600 a case. That's it. So I work out the sandbox of the case. And then I come back and say, right, now, Mr. CTO, Mr. Engineer, Mrs. Engineer, whoever I've taken on this, I've now got this is what we want to do, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it. This is the end point of where it's going to go. And you've got $600 ASP to do that. And I need to make 70% margins. So therefore, you've got to make this thing boxed, ready, be it sterile, non-sterile, whatever, where for every case, it cannot exceed our company $200. Please start on a list of features and benefits and ideas and concepts and go down them. And when you get to $200, draw a big red line across it. And that's it. And then make sure they're ranked in order of what's important. And then the final piece of this is now go and validate that with some actual real human beings who are going to use this in the future, not your own internal think. Say what you're going to do, what you're going to do, how much it's going to be. These are the feature sets. Get alignment and make sure that it's answering the need that they've got. The need, not what they want, the need. Don't tell them these things yet, but ask them the need and start in your mind working out, is what we could do going to fix this or not? And that would be before any single ever piece of engineering is ever done, ever.
It's so beautiful. So do a lot of people get this wrong?
Oh, yeah, 90%.
Yeah.
So a lot of ideas come from surgeons who say, I want a stronger scalpel. So they go and build a company to build a stronger scalpel, and nobody actually wants a stronger scalpel, only them. Quite often it's researchers in labs who work out how to take a pig's tail and turn it into a spring. So therefore, they're looking for any way that that could be used in somebody's body to make a spring out of pigtails. Okay, that's quite an often way. That's a disaster as well. You have a lot of other ones where strategics just have desperation because their market share is diminishing, and they'll just try and get anyone to invent anything. And especially if it looks like that's the new shiny thing. Oh, this new PFA thing is the shiny thing. Let's get a company just to build another PFA thing that's a pale imitation at half the cost. That's another thing that gets done. Lots of reasons why it shouldn't be done. And I think that 50% of most ideas should be killed before any engineer ever puts the first screw in anything.
So what would you be your, because you kind of went through 4 key points, which is very helpful, and you lead with actually doing a commercial validation of the concept, and that redlining is fantastic. Once an engineer puts their hands to it, or even before that, like if someone wants to start a company as a tech founder coming out of an engineering discipline, I've talked about the innovation trifecta with you of unmet need, technical feasibility, commercial viability. What would you do to help that individual reframe their entire approach to the why and what they're starting to make sure that they don't just get lost in comfort? Because it's comfortable to progress a technical solution under your desk, as opposed to actually going out and having these conversations with clinicians and understanding the reimbursement process and the regulatory pathways and everything else that can kill a startup. Specifically to tech founders, how would you increase their probability of success?
So there's a couple of things to do. So if they're a first-time tech founder, I would say to them, you must not build a company, and you must not be the CEO, and you must not be the founder. You have to be in the co-pilot seat. This is so hard. I'm just finishing my book at the minute on this, which is like, it's called the Survival Guide. It's called the MedTech Survival Guide, MedTech Startup Survival Guide. And I can tell you, it's so complex. There's 6 million things you have to get right for this to work. And, just trying to work that out as you're going along, you're better to sit in the co-pilot seat and watch an expert who's been through this and got scar tissue do it. And no matter what they've got sitting under their desk, and I'm sure it's the best thing in the world ever, like the other 30,000 that have failed companies. I'm sure it is I'm sure it's better than them. It just has to be, right? Because why not? Because it's theirs. So I would still force then the pilot, the person who's done this before, to run the process. And if their idea, their tech, becomes the winning thing that actually does solve the problem, brilliant. But if it doesn't, it gets killed, because nobody has an ugly baby, and nobody wants to admit their idea was great, but it was not the right solution. You always have to you have to start with the why. You have to start with the why, not the middle piece, which is the engineering solution that then looks for a why, looks for a solution of how it might exit and stuff. The whole thing has to join up. If it happens that technology is so cool and perfectly fits that, you've got the 1 in a million that's going to survive, right? And it's going to be cool. Rarely happens, but it can. But I would never be leading with the tech, ever. I think it's really the backwards way of doing something in surgery, and it's not that it can't sometimes work, and some people have made it work, but it's not a surefire way of making it work. If you want a surefire way of making it work, start with the why, start with the end, fit the pieces in between, and if that technology is the best solution, it'll be brilliant.
And get a co-founder, right? Or
get a team, get a team.
Do not solopreneur things as a techie.
No, it's definitely not. Again, if you're a techie who's done a couple of times and you've actually succeeded, hey, great, go for it 100 times over.
Yeah.
First time founders should never ever be what I would say is first time founders. They're first time people who've got a good idea, but they shouldn't be founding the company. They shouldn't be running the company. They shouldn't be deciding where it goes. Another classic is people like to stick it in their garage, and there's a lot of people who end up putting companies in really weird towns in the outskirts of a small town, on the back of a small town in Germany, because the local authority will give them a 10,000 euro grant. That's not a company. That's somebody who's just taken a grant. So there's lots of things that go into this.
Excellent.
Awesome.
To all of that, I'm still absorbing it. The final thing that I'll land on, which is just super simple, Steve. Within my group, I have a community that helps people with big brains build the life they desire, living where they want, loving what they do, being
Yes.
paid well for it. And I
Yeah.
help individuals triangulate their journey, whether they have a lot of lack of definition in their life, a lot of unknown unknowns. If they're disoriented, they don't know what that next best step looks like, or they're isolated. They don't have people around them that have seen the same level of success they aspire to. So I help people build that life by fixing that little trifecta as well. You are a remarkable individual that you're living in Italy. You've run these amazing companies. You seem to be doing well financially, as we've discussed. What would be your encouragement to folks that are trying to build a life like that, where they love what they do, they're paid well for the work they do, and they can live where they want as we become a more global world,
Yeah.
so that they can just take those incremental steps with the unique giftings and passions they have?
Yeah. So it's a deep philosophical question for me,
Yeah.
and it's one that I try and help a lot of people with this myself. So primarily, I start with the function that life is very short, and you may be able to do 3 startups in your entire life, let's say, okay, or 3 major career things in your entire life. You were there. How long were you there? 12 years. You were 12 years at J&J.
10. Sorry.
10. Okay, 10.
Lost you there.
So if an average career is 40 years, that 25% of your working career is already in one place, right? So you don't get to do that many things.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that really counts at the end of the journey, no one's going to sit there at the end of this journey and say, oh, I wish I'd worked more. Oh, I wish I'd failed more startups. Oh, I wish they just don't, right? That's just not how. Everyone knows this story arc, and the arc ends with people saying, I wanted more love, and I wanted more time, and I wanted more passion with my kids and things. I want to see
Mm-hmm.
whatever it be, right? Your passions in life, and the fundamental things that your passions drive is happiness. So what you have to understand is that everything starts in the root of happiness, and it's the amount. It's also in the root of being. This is the one thing that you really learn, especially as you get older, is that live the moments, live the happy moments. That's really, really important. So if I'm setting out on a journey of what I'm going to do, whatever's fundamental in that, no matter how driven I am and how much passion I've got to do the project, am I going to be happy doing it? Is it in an area and thing that I'm doing that gives me fulfillment of when I do it and I look back, I'll be emotionally touched by it. And healthcare is brilliant for that. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
better than a lot of the other
Yeah.
sectors because we sit and we say, I've sat with patients who are not dead now because we cured them. You can't, that gives you a sense of purpose and being that feeds into the happiness. I'm not saying that you're laughing and joking at the time or whatever, but you're happy and you're fulfilled by what you do. So that's an important piece. The people that you go on that journey with will determine your degree of happiness or whether you hate getting out of bed in the morning. So whatever you're going to do in the direction, choose your journey partners well with you. Just like you choose that in life
Mm-hmm.
for your life partners, your work partners are way more important than you think. And as I said in my walk around video, you can end up actually spending more time with your partners at work than you can with your partners at home.
Mm-hmm.
And let that sink in. Because if you're miserable with those people and you don't like those people and they don't like you, that is going to be a horrible 10-year journey. Okay. So pick the goal of what you want to do, make sure it's going to make you happy, and make sure the people who go on the journey with you make it happy. Understand that money helps, but it's not the goal. I don't come from a rich background at all,
Yep.
but you want to have enough money, and you do want to have enough money that at the end of every month, you can pay the bills, pay your kids' clothes, put food on the table, have an okay life, right? Anything above that is pure cream and shouldn't be driven after, in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
It should be if you can get the basics, you sustain your happiness. You don't end at the end of the month worrying about the money. Okay, that's what the goal is. It's to get to the point of where you're not worrying about it. Then, if all goes well and you make millions and stuff, brilliant. Pay it forward, give it back to other people, invest in other people, which is what I do. I invest in a lot of other companies. Help the ecosystem to keep rolling along so that you can spread that happiness. And it's hard to raise money, so help the raising of the money. But anchor yourself in the fact that you do this because of the why, not because of the money. And those successful entrepreneurs who do this, they never do it. They never set out to do it for the money. If you do, that's a terrible, terrible
Yes.
it's a terrible way to live your life. But if you can make more money out and stuff, great. I'm not, I do believe in capitalism, believe that if you have a great idea and you save millions of people's lives, you should be rewarded for it. That's fine. But it shouldn't be the motivation. But your motivation should be that you reach the end of the month in a secure enough way that you can enjoy the happiness with your family and with your friends and with whatever you're doing in life, and look each week and reflect and say, tough, really, really tough, but it's okay. We move forward. So I think with that philosophy, that's the way that I tell people to go and look at these things. Live where you want to live if you can. Don't go and live in a rainy, miserable city that you just hate in a language that you don't know. Why? Because you'll be miserable, and you're doing this to be happy. So why make yourself miserable? If you're doing startups, do as much virtually as you can. Don't try and drag people in a start. One of the things that I see people do all the time is they uproot their entire lives for a startup that's got 3 months of money left. They sell their house and they go and they literally unpack the boxes as they run out of money as a company and lose their job. Don't do that. Not in 2025. I mean, Zoom meetings, fly in, fly out. Any investor or manager, you have to go and move your entire family to that place. You are going to be unhappy. Don't go there. And that's about my cookbook for it, really. And the rest of that then follows. And don't take yourself seriously. My God, don't take yourself seriously at all, because no one else does. No one else does. You can be as serious as you want, but no one else is going to. They're all going to think, "Oh, well, I'm an idiot." So yeah, have some fun with it as well.
Oh my gosh, Steve, this is so beautiful. And I there's so much for me to sip on and think about as I rewatch this. I'm excited to edit it. It's going to be a lot of fun for me because I always find the little tidbits I missed. And how could folks connect with you? I mean, I'll put a link in the description to your website. I know you're on LinkedIn as well.
Yep.
Is that good?
So yes, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Steve G. Bell, which stands for Graham, as in Alexander Graham Bell. So you shouldn't forget that, Steve G. Bell. But on my website as well, it's got my email. I think it's even got my WhatsApp number. I'm a very WhatsAppier. I think that's an easy way to connect. Not a big scheduler. I like to WhatsAppy just on the fly because seize the moment. I might not be in next week to take the Zoom call. like that a little bit. So yeah, they can reach out to me on that way, or if they lose all those things and they can't remember this video, they can reach out to you and you can ping them my stuff.
Yeah. And do you have any lingering thoughts for folks to sip on besides the whole hour and a half? Any last things for you?
Yeah, I think don't be scared to reach out to people and ask, and be cheeky and ask. It's very rare in my 35 years that someone said, "How dare you ask me a question? And how dare you send me an email? And how dare you are just an imbecile. I shall not respond to you." It's very rare. They might just blank you a bit and say, "I'm a bit busy." But most people will respond and say either "I can't help you" or "I've not got time" or whatever. You don't ask, you don't get. Right. So my mum had a statement, and I'll leave it with this because I come back to my mum full circle for the conversation. So there's a saying which says you don't ask, you don't get. Right. If you don't want, you don't ask, so you don't get. So want it, ask it, get it. Dead easy.
Oh my gosh, it's beautiful. I mean, this conversation is a product of it, because I doubted if I could even make that ask of you to connect, and one conversation led to another, and then a podcast. And this has been such a valuable, humbling, joyful experience for me as well, just to be able to chat.
Oh, no, for me as well. For me as well. And I love curious minds, and I love people who are willing to look. And you've got your own origin story as well, which I find fascinating. I've been loving listening to what you've been talking about as well. I think we've both been through a little bit of a crucible of fire in some things as well. And you come out the other end, and we're both smiling at the end of it. So enjoy the ride.
Don't understand how.
Yeah, enjoy the ride.
Hey friends, it's Joe from Even Farther in the Future, and as promised, I want to provide you with Steve's Big Five if you're thinking about doing a robotic startup in 2025. Additionally, after this, I have 3 quick little gifts that I'll share with you. So let's get through these 5 so that you can kind of synthesize everything you've learned today. First of which, why do we want to do this? Throughout the discussion, we questioned potentially how J&J was approaching surgical robotics. I have thoughts that might be slightly dissonant from Steve, which is cool. But overall, if we're going into these spaces, we need to be very critical about our larger vision and mission, why we're building towards this through robotics, because it's deeply complex, there's high risk, it's really expensive. So before you do a startup, consider the why. Number 2, what is the end point? So rather than just wandering and taking incremental steps in all kinds of different directions and running out of money, we really need to understand, are we doing a build to buy model? Are we trying to get acquired? Are we trying to do a private company that stands on its own? If you could consider the end point in mind, then it helps you choose the right pathway moving forward. So start with the end before you begin. And he said, I think like 90% of startups get that wrong. So that's a big one to focus in on. Number 3, I loved this one. Build the ultimate hit team. He mentioned that you're going to be doing this for the next 8 to 12 years. So pick people that are both deeply competent, but that you love partnering with, that you're going to be at the airports together on Friday, traveling to connect with clinicians at congresses. You're going to be on the road a lot. You want to make sure it's people that will sharpen one another and push each other forward and share that mission and vision. And I think it's implied have fun in the journey as well. So that's number 3. Number 4, for all you lovely busy people, commercial. This one's a hard one to swallow as an engineer. The next 2 are hard for engineers. Commercial validation is greater than engineering. And I think what Steve meant by this is before you ever design anything, even before you start working towards your MVPs and your concepts and your prototypes, you need to validate if there's actually a commercially viable pathway forward with this technology. What's a hospital's capacity to pay for bringing robotics into a new clinical specialty? Because you have to start with the assumption that you're not going to be able to increase reimbursement right off the bat. So figure out what you're working towards and then give the engineers that scope of, I need a solution at this cost that does this, and cut off all the extra activities or the extra scope creep that would make it too expensive. And then number 5, the one that might surprise you, is to all you tech founders. And I consulted some of you in Japan, and I love you deeply. Don't go it alone. Steve, at least in surgical robotics and in medtech in general, Steve seems to wholeheartedly reject the concept of a tech founder, solopreneur kind of idea of just make an invention, and if the technology is good enough, people will buy it. You have to understand a commercially viable product in order to have a company, which is beautiful. So anyway, I hope you gleaned a ton from this conversation. The 3 gifts I have for you is for all you people that want to watch more. Let me do my little magic here. So we have 1, give the little ta-das. 2 is the suspense building. And oh geez, 2, and then 3. Number 1, I'm starting a series called Second Sips, or a second sip. If you'd like a second sip of this conversation, I had promised a list of definitions to help people follow with the conversation. As I started to work through it, I realized that there's a lot to unpack in this discussion. So I'm basically going to grab my tablet and we're going to go through my edit. If I go to my fancy view for a second, where's my buttons? Desktop wide. Is that the right one? Yeah. And then click on this. Like, I've put a whole bunch of markers throughout this conversation in the edit. And my plan is to redo some of these clips, like watch a 30-second clip of this discussion with you and break it down deeper, explain the technology, go on Google, pull things up, go on my Sketchpad and lay out exactly what's happening in the clinical environment so that you can have even greater nuance, because there's just only so much time with Steve. So we got to work at his level, but I'd like to break it down and go a little bit deeper. So if you enjoyed this discussion and want to go farther, you want a second sip, then that first video is for you. Let me go back to this magic view. And then the second video that'll pop up over here somewhere is I recently did a workshop within my community on Skool on how to build the life you desire. We touched on this at the back end of the conversation, and we went through an hour session where I walk through how you can actually learn how to live where you want, love what you do, be paid well for it. I share a lot more of my story as well. So this video could be helpful. And then the third one, which I'll just give you a little tour, I have a free assessment that could be helpful for you. Let me go back to the magic. There we go. We're all over the place. It's fun. Doesn't have to be perfect. So I have this community called the Big Brain Club. It's derpy, nerdy, and fun. And I basically help three different kinds of brains. I help left brain people, which are engineers and global leaders. Right brains are the creatives and community builders. And then whole brains are parents and entrepreneurs. And I provide them a free assessment where they can get their life in the green. So I baseline how undefined their journey feels. Do they have a lot of unknown unknowns they're facing, problems they can't solve? How disorienting is their journey? Do they know what the next best step looks like? Are they kind of paralyzed? And then how isolating is it? Do they have people around them that have seen the same level of success that they aspire to? And I provide them this assessment, and then they do this really high value added post. We have about 150 people in here. It's called Find Your Next. So if I click on here, now let's go to my pro brains. So for instance, this is Cassandra. She's fantastic. She is a medical practitioner, and she has a community called Wound Fit where she helps practitioners learn how to address wounds in geriatrics, so in elderly patients. So she's a community builder just like me on this platform, and she shares her origin story, like what happened during residency is there's a severe wound that led to poor outcomes, and et cetera, on this path towards educating other caretakers in these spaces. Her desired future state, what she wants to build towards with this education business, why she wants this change in her life, what she's most afraid of, and then her assessment, and then the community can wrap around her and support her in her journey. And this becomes a change log for her life and for others to post updates and support each other. So if this is helpful to you, you're more than welcome to pop into the Big Brain Club. There's a link below. And definitely connect with Steve. His stuff's really cool too. Let me find his thing really quick for you. And then I'll let you run because I know you're busy. How to start up in medtech. So this is his website. It's really valuable. You could check out his online courses. He's got an intro to some of his experience as well. He's got a class on pitching, which is probably phenomenal. So definitely look at that. And I'm sure you will get this 500 euro back if you run through this whole course. He actually has a like a PDF I think you could download in here that goes through all the modules. It's hidden somewhere on his website. I found it earlier. And then you could also go through this assessment to learn how to get funded. Like he has this founder suite that helps people. And yeah, just check him out. Steve's remarkable. You can contact him. The whole thing's there. So there's a link in the description as well. But anyway, watch the video 1, video 2, pop into my community if you think that assessment's helpful, and go connect with Steve because he's crushing it. So keep changing the world. I'll see you on the next one, and you can sip on that.